of all the defeats in the Cold War, the capture of Cuba by the communists is the most unacceptable. Stupid patriots knew Castro was a communist in 1957. But moderate patriots, such as the State Department, haven't admitted it yet.
I welcome this kind of examination.
I am paying for this microphone.
What difference does it make?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I'm just a patsy.
Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war.
Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there.
We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
The United States is owned by foreign corporations. Do you really care? And if anybody cares, they're considered crazy.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
Man, all the humanity and all the...
Controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
An unspeakable tragedy. Dead on arrival.
And I will go to my grave being at peace about it.
Our long national nightmare is over. Don't give up. Don't ever give up.
This is the Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick.
Hi, this is your friendly neighborhood host, S.T. Patrick. I'll join you again on the next episode of the Midnight Rider News Show. But tonight, here's our friend, the lone gunman himself, Rob Clark.
Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. This is Rob Clark, your friendly neighborhood quarterly host, traipsing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted in your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, court historians, and the textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight, we're going to be taking a closer look at General Edwin Walker and his associates. What's happening, people? It's good to be back. Let's clean the castle a little bit, as ST likes to say. Once again, I'm privileged and honored to be back hosting the Midnight Rider News Show for the third time. If you haven't been keeping up, make sure you hit up the Midnight Rider News Show archives. You can listen to all of their past 80-plus shows for free anytime you like. And there is a bunch of great ones there. In fact, they're all great. You might not agree or disagree with each subject that's covered on this show, but it is a wide variety of topics, and the interview style and the subject matter always make for an interesting show. So please head over to midnightridernews.com. I think that's right. And make sure you check out the archives. And if you've enjoyed my past few shows on here, and if you enjoy what you listen to tonight, if you've never heard me before, feel free to check out my archives at the Lone Gunman Podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, and anywhere great podcasts are available. All right, that being said, let's get into it, folks, because the topic for tonight's show is one that is very, very in-depth and very, very convoluted, and also mixed with controversy, which I know, shocker, most things are when it comes to the assassination. There's a lot of competing theories about what took place in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. And there's a lot of folks that have a lot of theories, and they've been morphing over the years. Various theories from the mafia did it, the CIA did it, Oswald did it, the extreme right did it, top level assassins did it. And on and on. The problem being, it's very hard to prove one thing definitively. Hence the reason, we are still interested in the case today. And the reason that folks like me and ST bring you these type of shows. It's not just pure entertainment. It's also an information gathering process. I don't think any one person has all the answers to what took place. The most informed people that have the biggest picture and are honest in their intellectual capacity to understand everything that was going on back then have the clearest picture of what probably did happen so many, many years ago. We're not just going to stumble into that smoking gun document that's going to reveal everything. We're not going to stumble across the person who has all the answers, or who claims to have been there, or who claims to have shot JFK. There's problems with everybody's story. If you really, really want to tear it apart, truthfully, people that like to believe in various theories and stories, most of them aren't being very intellectually honest with you when it comes down to speculation and truth. And that's the biggest problem, is because people want to believe so bad that they know the truth, or they've figured out what happened. And the investigator in all of us would love to be the person who cracks the case, who has all the answers, who can tell you definitively what took place, what happened, who was involved, who pulled the trigger. The truth is, we just don't know. And that's why we're still arguing today about it. And we're going to be talking tonight about a much, much overlooked aspect of the Kennedy assassination. And that is the executive branch and the Justice Department's, war of words with the extreme right, extreme ultra patriots of the United States at the time that all this was going on. I mean, when you look at the Kennedy assassination, you have to take a look at what was going on in the world, what was going on in the United States, to understand the political climate that all of this happened in. The assassination took place in Dallas in broad daylight. And, just to know that is just not enough, okay? For someone to kill President Kennedy like that, they had to have a really, really good reason. And believe me, a lot of people had good reasons. He had angered many, many folks in his political, in his rising political career, to his ascension as the President of the United States, and the way he was dealing with foreign policy. So we're going to be trying to understand a little bit of that tonight, as far as the internal workings of what was going on here in the United States, in Dallas specifically, with some of these far-right extremists. And among them, most notably, was a general named General Edwin Walker. Now, to understand a little bit about the man, let's take a look at some of what happened in his military career. He served in World War II and in the Korean War. He was criticized by President Eisenhower for promoting a personal political opinion while in uniform. Walker resigned his commission in 1959, but Eisenhower refused to accept his resignation and gave Walker a new command of the 24th Infantry Division in Augsburg, Germany. Walker again resigned his commission in 1961 after being publicly and formally admonished by the Joint Chiefs of Staff for allegedly referring to Eleanor Roosevelt and Harry S. Truman as pink in print, a charge made by a leftist newspaper named the Overseas Weekly, but never substantiated, and for violating the Hatch Act of 1939 by attempting to influence the votes of his troops by distributing extreme right-wing literature to them. President John F. Kennedy accepted his resignation, making Walker the USA's only major general to resign during the 20th century. Now, that's probably not something you really want to be known for. He was born in 1909 in Texas, Kerr County. He died on Halloween Day in 1993 at the age of 83 in Dallas, Texas. He served 30 years in the United States Army and reached the rank of a 2-star Major General. He was awarded the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit twice, and the Bronze Star twice. He campaigned for governor of Texas in 1962, but lost the Democratic primary election to the eventual winner, John Connally. I mean, could you imagine if history had turned out just a little bit differently? If General Walker had been in that car with his old buddy, or nemesis, John Kennedy that day. Wow. In October of 1962, Walker was arrested for promoting riots at the University of Mississippi in protest against admitting a black student named James Meredith into the all-white university. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy ordered Walker committed to a mental asylum for a 90-day evaluation in response to his role in the Ole Miss riot of 1962. But Walker was released 5 days later. His attorney, Robert Morris, convinced a Mississippi grand jury not to indict Walker.
James H. Meredith is formally enrolled at the University of Mississippi, ending one chapter in the federal government's efforts to desegregate the university. The town of Oxford is an armed camp, following riots that accompany the registration of the first Negro in the university's 118-year history. Much of this film record was destroyed when our cameraman, Gordon Yoder, was attacked, but he did salvage pictures of Governor Ross Barnett at the scene. The governor fought the court order long and bitterly before modifying his stand, saying Mississippi was overpowered by the federal government. President Kennedy appealed to the students and to the people of the state to comply peacefully with the law and bring the crisis to an end. Even as he talked, riots were breaking out in Oxford.
Americans are free, in short, to disagree with the law, but not to disobey it. For any government of laws and not of men, no man, however prominent or powerful, and no mob, however unruly or boisterous, is entitled to defy a court of law. If this country should ever reach the point where any man or group of men, by force or threat of force, could long deny the commands of our court and our Constitution, then no law would stand free from doubt. No judge would be sure of his writ, and no citizen would be safe from his neighbors.
Nearly 6,000 troops patrol Oxford to maintain order, and arrests mount to more than 200 as smaller disturbances erupt the next day. Former Major General Edwin Walker, who came here from his home in Texas, is put under arrest and held in high bail on charges of inciting insurrection. He was flown to a federal prison hospital as relative calm settled on the town in the greatest crisis the South has faced since the Civil War.
All right, there you go. There's a little background on the whole Mississippi campus riot that went down. Now, the fact that Robert Kennedy personally ordered General Walker to a mental asylum did not go unnoticed by General Walker at all. when we speak of motives, you have to understand what kind of a man General Walker was and what was going on in his mind at the time. Interestingly enough, for those who have studied the assassination in depth, they know that there was an attempt on General Walker's life on April 10th, 1963. But what a lot of people don't know is that through the grapevine, and of course we have no official documentation of this, although General Walker claimed to have a file from the Dallas Police Department, he said that disappeared when the files were open to the public. It was not included. That stated that Lee Harvey Oswald was actually arrested the night of his attempted assassination and released from the Dallas Police Department upon orders from none other than the Attorney General of the United States himself, Robert Kennedy. Now whether that's true or not, we can't prove one way or the other unless we have that documentation, which we do not have. But whether it is true or not, the fact that General Walker believed it, could add a lot of weight to things. He claimed that two members of the Dallas Police Department, who he had known for quite some time, confided in him this information after the assassination. So, whether it's true or not, we can't prove it one way or the other, but the fact that General Walker believed it could lend itself to motive for what happened in November of 1963. The official story states that Oswald began to put Walker under surveillance, photographing the general's home on the weekend of March 9th and 10th, 1963, and that Oswald's friend, a 51-year-old Russian emigre and petroleum geologist named George de Mohrenschildt, would later tell the Warren Commission that he knew that Oswald disliked Walker. And it's been said by de Mohrenschildt that on one of their visits to the Oswald home, they just happened to see a rifle in the closet. And he jokingly said to Oswald, you were the one that took a pot shot at General Walker? To which Oswald supposedly was very uncomfortable after that was said, and pretty promptly ushered de Mohrenschildt and his wife Jean out of the apartment. Again, we don't know that this was a true event. We only have George de Mohrenschildt's account of the evening, which Marina has somewhat corroborated over the years. In fact, Marina testified to the Warren Commission that her husband told her that he traveled by bus to General Walker's house and shot at Walker with his rifle. Marina said that Oswald considered Walker to be the leader of a fascist organization, which entirely conflicts with any kind of a motive that Oswald would have had to kill Kennedy. If he thought that General Walker was a fascist and on the extreme right and on the extreme opposite end of political views of President Kennedy, it's another one of those anomalies that lends credence to the fact that Oswald didn't have any motive to do what he did, or what he was alleged to do. Now, apparently there was a note written in Russian by Oswald, found 10 days after the Kennedy assassination, that Oswald had supposedly left for Marina on the night of the attempt on General Walker, telling her what to do if he did not return. The bullet was too badly damaged to provide conclusive ballistics tests, but neutron activation tests later determined that it was extremely likely the bullet was a Carcano bullet manufactured by the Western Cartridge Company, the same ammunition used in the Kennedy assassination. Police Detective D.E. McElroy commented, "Whoever shot at the general was playing for keeps. The sniper wasn't trying to scare him. He was shooting to kill." Marina Oswald stated later that she had seen Oswald burn most of his plans in the bathtub, though she had hid the note he left her in a cookbook, with the intention of bringing it to the police should Oswald again attempt to kill Walker or anyone else. Marina later quoted her husband as saying, "Well, what would you say if someone got rid of Hitler at the right time? So if you don't know about General Walker, how can you speak on his behalf?" Oswald later wrote to an Arnold Johnson of the Communist Party USA that on the evening of October 23rd, 1963, he had attended an ultra-right meeting directed by Walker, the purpose of which we just don't know. Again, very interesting stuff. The political climate in Dallas in 1963 is volatile. I mean, volatile. I mean, you see the flyers that were printed prior to Kennedy's arrival in Dallas, the wanted posters, for all his supposed crimes against the American people, and the welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas stuff. And when you watch the parade in Dallas, what you don't see are a lot of the detractors, the folks waving Confederate flags, the folks that are mad about the fact that we're not doing anything about Cuba or Castro or Russia. And they had a voice, and believe me, they used it back then. In fact, here is General Walker's voice.
Of all the defeats in the Cold War, the capture of Cuba by the communists is the most unacceptable. Super patriots knew Castro was a communist in 1957. But moderate patriots, such as the State Department, haven't admitted it yet.
And he was not afraid to call out the State Department, the President, or anybody else by name or organization, believe me. But, as we all know, President Kennedy was not one to let sleeping dogs lie, and frequently answered his critics.
Now we are face to face once again with a period of heightened peril. The risks are great, the burdens heavy, the problems incapable of swift or lasting solution. And under the strains and frustrations imposed by constant tensions and harassment, the discordant voices of extremism are once again heard in the land. Men who are unwilling to face up to the danger from without are convinced that the real danger is from within. They look suspiciously at their neighbors and their leaders. They call for a man on horseback because they do not trust the people. They find treason in our churches, in our highest court, in our treatment of water. They equate the Democratic Party with the welfare state with socialism, socialism with communism. They object quite rightly to politics intruding on the military, but they are very anxious for the military to engage in their kind of politics.
So as you can see, there was a war of words going on back then. And the big fear that these extreme right-wingers had was communism. They were afraid of the spread of communism. And when it reached 60 miles off of our shore to Cuba, that only ramped things up 100 times over for their views and for their voices to be heard. Folks like General Edwin Walker and the Reverend Billy James Hargis, folks like Lauren Hall, they would go on tours to these places like churches, and these different outposts, and people that were sympathetic to their cause. And they would give these rousing speeches about the perils of communism and how our government's not doing enough, and how we're going to be taken over by communists, and we're not being hard enough, we're not going after them, we're not doing enough against Russia or Cuba, etc., and so on. And as time went on, their voices got louder until eventually, of course, something had to happen. And we all know what happened on November 22nd, 1963. And here are General Edwin Walker's comments a mere 2 weeks later.
Full justice is a requirement of our system to include full and complete investigations. The people of Dallas and the nation are entitled to the truth and the final reports of investigations and inquiries. Pravda, Castro, and the worker started malicious and deceptive attacks on the conservative right that continues to spread, holding Dallas responsible, and the political party spectrum, city, state, and national, immobilized. I compliment the Dallas papers on their effort to point out every possibility to the public. We must realize, regarding future events, that this press coverage did not extend to other cities. Dallas has been set up in the defensive instead of maintaining national unity in the face of the Cold War.
Now, once again, those were his comments, and 2 weeks after the assassination, as folks were being hypercritical of the far right, as he called it, in Dallas specifically. And he noted that it was mainly local media who was pointing this out, not necessarily national or world media. But he was feeling the heat, believe me, after Kennedy's assassination. And in fact, most of the right wing in Dallas was. They weren't hiding the way they felt about President Kennedy before the assassination. And, it made them almost look like prime suspects. Of course, they had a suspect, Lee Harvey Oswald, who they were trying desperately to find some kind of a tie to one of these far-right groups. But subsequently, his alleged actions, such as attempting to kill General Walker, kind of led them away from that theory. Now, the last time I was here, we spoke about mostly an associate of Jack Ruby's named Larry Crayford. And I explained in that episode that to believe that there was a conspiracy in the assassination of President Kennedy, one has to believe that Jack Ruby was somehow involved in this conspiracy to murder and silence Oswald before he could talk or testify. Now, when Chief Justice Earl Warren came to interview Jack Ruby in Dallas, Jack Ruby told him this: "There's an organization here, Chief Justice Warren. If it takes my life at this moment to say it, and Bill Decker said be a man and say it, there is a John Birch Society right now in activity, and General Edwin Walker is one of the top men of the organization. Take it for what it's worth, Chief Justice Warren. Unfortunately for me giving the people the opportunity to get in power because of the act I committed has put a lot of people in jeopardy with their lives. Don't register with you, does it?" Ruby begged Earl Warren to take him to Washington and he would reveal the entire truth of the Kennedy assassination. But he couldn't do it in Dallas. You wonder why? Let's just say that many folks in the sheriff's department, in the police department, in the local government, hoodlums, criminals, shared the same views, the same extreme views that folks like General Walker and the John Birch Society did. In fact, back in the day, and you can even see it in a lot of the photos from back then, even members of the Dallas Police proudly wore KKK patches on their uniforms. Could you imagine that going over today? You get pulled over and, all right, well, I see this is not going to go well. And that's just the way it was back then. And nobody questioned it. That's just the way it was. And that's the way it was in Dallas. And Ruby knew it. And he knew he couldn't say what he wanted to say at the time. So when you start putting all these little pieces together, it made me want to start to try to find some kind of a link, if there could be one established, between Jack Ruby and the far right, or General Edwin Walker. So I started digging, and I did find some stuff. Approximately a week after the attempted assassination of General Walker, there was an arrest made. And the man arrested is named William McEwen Duff. Now you might be saying, who is William McEwen Duff? Never heard of him. Well, I'll tell you. William Duff had shown up in December of 1962 at General Walker's home and offered to help his organization in exchange for a place to stay. It was reported that Duff became lazy about his duties and that on March 10th, 1963, his luggage was moved into the hall and he was asked to leave. Robert Surrey said that Duff was not truthful about his whereabouts before arriving in Dallas. Now, William Duff was a former British SAS officer who had emigrated to the United States and was apparently joined the Navy first, then the Army, and was eventually kicked out for dual enrollments. As they were investigating the General Walker shooting, of course, going to ask, okay, well, who could have possibly had a motive? Well, they found out about this guy, William Duff, who had been basically freeloading at General Walker's house while he was out touring the country with the Reverend Billy James Hargis on their Midnight Ride tour, where they were going across the United States and doing a lot of these rallies and conventions and speeches to rally support for their organization and to raise funds. Well, in the meantime, Duff is back in Dallas, chilling at General Walker's house, not doing much of anything. He was supposed to be doing more of the manly chores around the house, such as, getting the trash together, doing some landscaping, general repairs around the house, things of this nature. But according to the female help, Duff wasn't doing anything. So when Walker found out about this, he asked Duff to immediately leave the premises. So the Dallas police figured, well, maybe he was a disgruntled employee who was getting back at his old boss by trying to kill him. Well, he's arrested April 18th, 1963 in Dallas. And he's taken in and he's given a lie detector test. Duff was alleged to have made a statement to someone that he was the one that shot at General Walker. Duff was approached by two private detectives and offered $5,000 to shoot Walker in an attempt to determine if Duff was responsible for the Walker shooting. Now, this took place a few months after he had been, quote, cleared by the Dallas police. The detectives made a tape recording of their conversation with Duff, and the results of their investigation was turned over to the Dallas Police Department. Watts stated Duff never admitted to the detectives that he was the person who had previously shot at General Walker. So, he apparently passed the lie detector test when he was initially arrested. I thought I had the questions and answers. I don't have them. But I did see them. They were very straightforward. He answered no to everything, and the results were that he passed. So, initially he was cleared, but he did make some interesting allegations when it comes to the Kennedy assassination. Hang on to your seats, folks. In the course of Secret Service interviews about the Walker affair and the assassination, William Duff was asked if he knew Jack Ruby, the man who murdered Lee Harvey Oswald. Duff was interviewed on January 24th, 1964, while Duff was still in the Army, and said he was positive that he had never seen Ruby. He told the FBI he had seen many photographs of Ruby, but was certain he had never seen him before the murder. But on April 8th, 1964, 3 months later, William Duff told Secret Service agent James Cantrell in an interview while he was in the Army at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and again in several subsequent phone calls that he had, in fact, seen Ruby at the Walker residence. He told Cantrell that Ruby visited the Walker residence about once a month during the period of December 62 through March 63 while Duff was employed there. Each time Ruby visited, he was in the company of two unidentified white males and arrived in a Ford car. Explaining his initial denial of knowing Ruby, Duff said that when he was first interviewed by Secret Service in January, he had been recovering from double hernia surgery in an Army hospital, and that he was more concerned with his surgery than about telling the FBI that he had seen Ruby at Walker's residence a number of times. Duff told them that Ruby was called Jack at the Walker residence. He said one of Ruby's associates was a member of the John Birch Society. Duff even volunteered to take a lie detector test. Duff stated that Ruby and his two companions met on each occasion in Walker's living room behind closed doors. Duff said that it was possible that others in the Walker household might have also seen Ruby, but he doubted they would admit it, out of loyalty to General Walker. Well, isn't that interesting? On May 25th, 1964, Agent Cantrell gave Duff the opportunity to correct his story, if it was not the truth. Duff stood by his allegation and again volunteered to take a polygraph test. Duff added that he felt that he knew too much of Walker's operation and of the persons visiting his residence, intimating that Walker was diverting funds collected for the John Birch Society for personal use at the Highland Park Bank in Dallas, Texas. Duff had good reason to be afraid of Walker. Now, apparently, the heat was on. General Watts, who was a close friend of General Edwin Walker, whom Duff had went to stay with when he left General Walker's, started turning the heat up on Duff a little bit. And on June 12th, 1964, a month later, Duff's wife told the FBI that she had finally secured Duff's phone number and called to remind him to contact Secret Service agent Cantrell to arrange the lie detector test that he had earlier agreed upon. According to Miss Duff, her ex-husband told her, "You notify Cantrell and I'll be gone." Mrs. Duff judged by his statement that Duff had no intention of pursuing the matter in which he alleged that Jack Ruby had visited Walker's house. Well, 4 days later, on June 16th, 1964, the FBI interviewed Duff and he denied that he ever saw Ruby at Walker's. In fact, he went to extremities in his denial, too much so to be believed. He told the FBI that he was not sure if the man he saw at Walker's was Ruby, based on news photos of Ruby after he murdered Oswald. He waffled further, saying he would not swear definitively, and he had doubt in his mind and was not sure that it was Ruby. Duff said he had no basis for associating Walker with Ruby. He said the view of the man he thought was Ruby was a profile, and it was a view of a man's back only. Incredulously, he gave a description of the man that he originally believed to be Ruby as having graying white hair and being very thin. And everybody in the world knows that Ruby was just the opposite of the man Duff described. Ruby had dark brown hair, which appeared jet black in the black and white media of the day. Ruby was pudgy and round-faced, hardly very thin. So, apparently, somebody had got to William Duff and had him recant his story. Now, if this wasn't enough to give you a little percolation in your brain, chew on this. According to a December 14th, 1963 FBI report, restaurant owner Joe Loria advised the Dallas FBI that he saw William Duff, whom he described as a former resident of General Walker's home, on one occasion in his restaurant in the company of, you guessed it, Lee Harvey Oswald. The sighting occurred 7 to 8 months prior to the date of Loria's FBI interview. Duff left Walker's home on March 10, 1963, a month before the April 10th shooting incident, which places Loria's sighting of the two towards the end of Duff's employ with Walker. Loria knew Duff well, but he did not know Oswald. Loria recognized Oswald from pictures after the Kennedy assassination. And on January 24, 1964, the FBI interviewed William Duff, and he simply denied knowing Oswald, and the matter was given no further consideration. So, there's some interesting food for thought. Not only do we have a former employee of General Walker's who was staying at his house, swearing that he had saw Ruby there, swearing that he would take a lie detector test, after initially denying it, only to end up denying it again when the heat is turned up on him. Apparently these two detectives that had offered him $10,000 to kill Walker were employed by General Watts. And General Watts was, again, General Walker's good friend, and likely doing what he was told by General Walker to do. Apparently the tactics worked, and Duff changed his story. Now, it's also interesting with this Oswald sighting in December of 62. And this comes from an independent source. The owner of a restaurant close to General Walker's house where William Duff used to frequent. He knew who William Duff was. They called him Scotty because he was Scottish. They called him Scotty. Knew him by name, knew him by face, and saw him eating dinner with somebody one night, but didn't really register who this guy was until after the assassination, when Joe Loria, the restaurant owner, saw Oswald's picture and was like, "Oh my God, that's the guy that was eating dinner with William Duff." Now, the conspiracy theorist in me has my brain racing all over the place right about this time. I'm trying to think of the possible connections and the possible machinations of what could have caused these two fellas to be talking. Now, as most of you know who've studied the Kennedy assassination, it's on pretty good authority from basically the only witness that we do have from the General Walker shooting, that there was two men involved and also a vehicle. Is it out of the realm of possibility that, possibly, under some quote unquote routine surveillance, Oswald may have come across this guy, McEwen, who was staying at Walker's home, and maybe struck up a friendship with him. Maybe they shared the same views on Walker. Maybe they had, the same interests. Maybe they formulated this plot together. We just don't know. It is interesting when you think of the possibility that Jack Ruby used to meet with General Walker on a regular basis, pretty much monthly. I know Jack Ruby shared the same kind of political views as General Walker, maybe not as extreme, or at least that we know of, but Jack Ruby was very anti-communist, very patriotic. Him and Walker would have had a lot of things in common, a lot of the same views. And if there was something else, if there was funding coming from somewhere else that was being funneled through, these far-right organizations or Walker himself to Ruby, for whatever reason, contributing to the fact that Ruby had to do what he did to Oswald, because he was afraid for his life. It's a very hard thing to fathom when you start thinking about everything. But something has to make sense here. When you look at Jack Ruby and you look at his connections are to the underground, the crime syndicate, the mafia, the extensions of being in the realm of organized crime. But then you also look at the fact that he was a proud Jewish man. You go looking at some of these flyers and some of these billboards that were being put up back then by other prominent Jewish businessmen like Bernard Weissman, folks like this. Is it out of the realm of possibility that Ruby was somehow involved with these Jewish businessmen who shared these far-right political views, who knew what kind of a man General Walker was? You couple that with the fact of what Jack Ruby told Earl Warren, hey, look, you get me out of Dallas, I'll tell you whatever you want to know. But right here in Dallas, there's an organization, okay, and it's made up of all these far-right guys, and I'm scared to death of them. Basically is what he's telling Earl Warren. Now, another interesting thing when it comes to General Walker and Jack Ruby, we come across this very interesting letter from General Walker to the Reverend Billy James Hargest, dated December 28, 1966. Dear Billy, thank you so much for my wonderful briefcase. It is great and will be very useful, and I like to be carrying something from our Christian crusade together. It gives me much more confidence. I'm sorry I missed going with you, Betty and the kids, for a few days as I had intended. My loss, which I will have to make up. My plans were set but shattered. I didn't feel it right to leave when the printer was a week late, and we did not get our Christmas publications until the 19th. After spending $1,000 for print for this crash program, we had to get them out. About 3,000, quite a task for us here. I believe it is timely with respect to the lawsuits and the coming Supreme Court decision. Clyde thought it was a good idea. Another peculiarity with Des Moines Shield returning to Dallas from Haiti, as Rubenstein is allegedly dying with cancer and might talk, in quotes. Des Moines Shield made a front page spread, and our informant produced his address, and whom he is staying with is not good. A warning. When Rubenstein leaves the hospital in a box, and in parentheses, the only way he will come out, there is no further block to returning the blame to the right wing. The books and press will gradually pick it up again. RFK must have it. It must be done as insurance and assurance. An RFK political necessity. Well, there you have it, folks. It's, when you look at the way and you look at the time, it's awfully, awfully hard to overlook the extreme political far right in the assassination of President Kennedy. And when you start trying to find these ties to folks, and the first time I was here, the first quarter of the year, I spoke about Guy Bannister and the New Orleans connections to all these guys. And one common thread that connects Dallas to New Orleans when it comes to the Kennedy assassination and Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby is the far right point of view. When you looked at Guy Bannister, I made it very clear about his political leanings and his extreme anti-communist leanings and the folks that he was tied to back then. And I mentioned they used to have these conferences, and these people would meet and they would talk and they would discuss things and plans that they had. They would discuss what was going on, what was happening, what was coming up. And when you look at what Miltier said in Georgia, about how the assassination was going to go down, from an office building, with a high-powered rifle. He was an extreme right guy. He was very wealthy, far-right political leanings. You look at Judge Leander Perez in New Orleans, same deal. Super rich, far-right political leanings. And in fact, guess where General Walker was on November 22nd, 1963. Leander Perez. And on September 4th, 1963, there was a Capitol House meeting in New Orleans, attended by the suspicious triumvirate of General Walker, Guy Bannister, and Leander Perez. Here we have Bannister, who not only was seen by 11 witnesses with Lee Harvey Oswald, but also was present at the plotting during the 1963 Congress of Freedom meeting, and has also been tied directly to Joseph Miltier. Also present at the Capitol House meeting was Leander Perez, who Willie Somerset identified as a financer of the Kennedy assassination. Now, William Somerset was the person that made the recording of Joseph Miltier, and William Somerset was an FBI informant. A Miltier personal letter established a direct Perez-Miltier relationship. The evidence of a Walker-Bannister relationship is also evidence that Oswald would not have tried to kill Walker during the Walker shooting. Now, it can be theorized that possibly, the Walker shooting was an attempt at not General Walker's life, but an attempt as to garner attention and sympathy for General Walker's cause. I mean, when you look at the amount of press, free press, that was generated from the attempted shooting of a former general inside his house, it shed a lot of light on General Walker and what he was up to in his activities now, and his political views, getting the word out and using the press to do it for you for free. What I'm insinuating here is that possibly, if Bannister was running Oswald in New Orleans, maybe Walker had come up with a plan. Okay. Well, maybe if I have somebody take a pot shot at me and miss, I'll get some free press out of the deal. Anybody crazy enough to do it? And possibly Bannister says, well, I might know a guy we might be able to convince to do it. He's got ties to Dallas. Right guy, former military, used to live in Russia. Perfect. This is the type of guy that, you're supposed to hate, even though possibly Oswald was doing it all under the auspice of our own federal government. And possibly Bannister knew it. But when you take into consideration all of these things, it's hard to just dismiss it out of hand. And until his dying day, General Edwin Walker was convinced that Oswald had taken the shot at him, that Oswald had been arrested, that Robert Kennedy had let him out, that the Kennedys were public enemy number one. And when you read that haunting letter from 1966 to his buddy, Billy James Hargis, about Ruby being the last blockade to blaming the far right for the assassination, and predicting mightily correctly that Jack Ruby, the only way he was going to be leaving the hospital was in a box, should give you a pause and a lot to think about. But basically, that's it. I just wanted to give you guys some different theories as to what could have possibly happened. We know all the major ones. We know all the popular ones. There's not a lot written about this. Of course, researchers have stumbled over things over the years in piecemeal form, bits and pieces here and there. But when you start to look at the incredible work of folks like Paul Trejo, who I encourage everyone to Google and check out and take a look at his work that he's done. Also, General Walker and the Murder of President Kennedy. The Extensive New Evidence of a Radical Right Conspiracy by Jeffrey Caulfield is a most excellent book and thoroughly footnoted and sourced and documented. And if you get done reading this book and you somehow fail to realize the importance of it, then I don't know what to tell you. It is a big book. And like I told you at the beginning of the show, it's important to understand the political air of the time when it comes to the Kennedy assassination. It's not like, oh, he raised the price of steel, so the Teamsters got together and killed JFK, or he raised the tax on oil, so H.L. Hunt was behind the assassination. H.L. Hunt, another prominent Dallas businessman, richest man in the world. Okay? Very far extreme right guy. In fact, he did a podcast, probably one of the first ones ever, a weekly show basically, where he would get on there and say and spew whatever far right stuff that he wanted. He used to meet with General Walker all the time and discuss what was going on in the political climate of the time. And they trade stories and ideas. And when you couple this with the fact that all these, very extremely wealthy businessmen and far right guys, they had the means surely to finance an assassination. They damn sure had the motive, as far as their views on Kennedy and communism. And they could have easily developed their own opportunity to make it happen. And when you look at all in the big picture and you see what was going on in New Orleans and you see what was going on in Dallas, you have what you have. And what we're looking for in this case is something that makes sense, something that's logical, something that's been right in front of your eyes the whole entire time. I would also encourage you to read A Farewell to Justice by Joan Millen, who chronicles through the Jim Garrison investigation. And, there's a lot in there about his looking into the far right and these very important and wealthy businessmen in New Orleans and Dallas. All very interesting stuff that cannot be denied. And, whether or not Oswald did shoot at General Walker, it doesn't really matter. It was a horrible shot. It either missed on purpose or it was a horrible shot from much closer distance. I mean, we're talking 40 feet than allegedly what happened to Kennedy, at 180 feet. So either it was a purposeful miss or it was from somebody who was a horrible shot or from somebody with a very crappy gun that was way off target. And whether it was done maliciously or purposefully for either good or bad, it certainly happened. And whether or not it was Oswald, the fact that General Walker believed that it was, and he believed that Robert Kennedy had ordered Oswald released after he was arrested, and had him locked up in a mental asylum. And, JFK as president and what he was doing with Cuba and the communists, it's just a perfect storm. It would have made total sense, for these guys to sit around, and there's only so much that you can rant and rave and complain about until you get tired of complaining and you get tired of talking and it's time to start doing. And if anybody was a man of action, it certainly was General Edwin Walker. And that's it for this week, folks. Once again, it's been a supreme pleasure that is all mine to guest host for ST on the Midnight Rider News Show. Again, head over to midnightridernews.com for the entire archives for the show and a lot of ST's written articles and from the team over there at Midnight Rider News. So thank you all for having me again. And I reckon I'll be back sometime, I think in November, maybe. We'll see. If he wants me back, we'll see. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. Once again, that's midnightridernews.com. Check it out. Listen and disseminate to all your friends. Share on social media. Follow on Twitter. Like on Facebook. And if you like what you heard tonight and you want to hear more of me, Google me, find me, Facebook me, Twitter me, the Lone Gunman Podcast. It's everywhere. Check it out. Until next time, this is your boy signing off. Good night, America.
You can contact ST Patrick by email at midnightridernews@gmail.com. Join us on Facebook at Midnight Rider News Show. Follow ST Patrick on Twitter at MWN_ST Patrick. We are LinkedIn at S.T.Patrick. And don't forget to follow Midnight Rider News on your YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and many of your favorite podcast providers. This has been a production of MidnightRiderNews.com and ST Patrick. Copyright 2018. All rights reserved. We'll see you next time, and be good to the night.